Hey everybody, good Friday evening. I just wanted to hop on here quick because some people have been asking, and one of the things that I wanted to point out is that Derrick Chauvin and George Floyd both worked at the same club. The owner wasn't aware or didn't know if there was any uh, paths crossed, but I still kind of question that. And as you know, hold on, I wanted to address something too. All four men, I just read it, and now I lost it because
Yeah, I'm sorry.
oops.
And
So,
we're
all four men were charged, or are going to be charged. So, I hate that when I do that.
from your family. How do you... All right, so I'm not.
So, basically, what's going on is
Not just to the seventh grade.
the Department of Justice said in a statement today that Chauvin, in addition to violating George Floyd's constitutional rights, he is also being indicted on charges related to a 2017 incident with a 14-year-old. In the DOJ statement, they said Chauvin held the teenager by the throat and struck the teenager multiple times on the head with a flashlight. But all federal indictment on all four officers is coming.
I'm not sure if you guys heard about this already, but there has been reports.
Yep, four.
I'm outside reports that a grand jury is issuing an indictment on Derrick Chauvin, as well as the three officers who are also being charged in the death of George Floyd. This after we know Derrick Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, just filed for a new trial. So this is a very interesting development. Mm-hmm. This information just came out, so we're definitely learning more as each minute passes. But this is just in. A federal grand jury has indicted Derrick Chauvin and the three officers involved in George Floyd's death. Now, the thing with the federal charges is this is a result of the Department of Justice coming in. And at first, they were only going to investigate Derrick Chauvin and potentially the other three officers. But what we learned after the guilty verdict came out, after we saw the chief of police testify, after we saw several other high-ranking lieutenants and sergeants within the Minneapolis police testify, we saw the Department of Justice expand their investigation in the Minneapolis Police Department. And so now, as a result of their efforts, we know that they have uncovered other incidents where Derrick Chauvin used similar force. He used a similar knee on the neck technique of other individuals during other encounters. And so one of them that has been pulled out and cited a lot throughout these investigations is the one in which he used a similar restraint with a 14-year-old. And the thing about this is, especially for people who are not in the Twin Cities area, there have been community leaders and different organizations like Communities United Against Police Brutality that have been calling this out. But none of that was allowed to be included as evidence in the trial. So a lot of people are not aware of all of these other incidents where Derrick Chauvin was using a similar force. But highlighting this right now because it just came out, a grand jury has indicted Derrick Chauvin as well as the other three officers. And so these will be civil rights violations. These will be federal charges, very different than what we've seen here on a state level. The trial that most of us just finished, watching a couple of weeks ago was the state versus Derrick Chauvin. And so while he was found guilty on a state level, and now there is going to be further charges on a federal level and from a civil rights standpoint. So this is a very Interesting development. We're going to continue to learn more about this. I'm definitely going to be following it. And as many of you know, I shared with you that I would be following the trial in August. So the state has brought forth charges against the other 3 officers. A lot of speculation on whether or not any of those charges will result in any type of conviction, because 2 of the officers were fairly new on the force, and it, from a legal standpoint, people have
I'm gonna stop that for a second.
It may be difficult to.
So they were fairly new on the force. I'm going to do a little investigating on that, because I was told one of them had worked in a different police force, so had maybe a little bit more training than the other one, but they were very new to the precinct or to this police force. Just to clarify that.
Them convicted, of what they're accused of. However, now that we're looking at a federal investigation, a federal indictment, this definitely changes the landscape a lot. And I think that this type of intervention, which we've also seen for Louisville, where Breonna Taylor was killed, the Department of Justice decided to investigate that police department as well. And some of the things we've heard on the ground is that there may have been an infiltration by white supremacy groups. And so if you think about what that could mean in terms of people using the career as a police officer to carry forth an agenda that is hateful and biased against Black people, it may help bring a little sense to the number of shootings and killings that we're seeing of unarmed Black men and women. And so while that is still all under investigation, we know that we don't see this often. You don't often see the Department of Justice intervene and start investigating police departments. And so to have 2 of these investigations be happening simultaneously, I think is very telling. I think it's something that we definitely should be paying attention to. And it will be very interesting to see what this indictment means, not only for these 4 former officers, Derrick Chauvin included, but also what this will mean for the upcoming trial. It will the evidence that is brought forth through the federal investigation have any implications for the state? So this is a huge development for those of you who have been following these trials and trying to see whether or not there will be justice. This is another layer that we typically don't see in these types of cases. And so for many, they were hoping for something like this to happen to really set a precedent. Because yes, the trial, while it had, it was representative and symbolic of meaningful change in policing across America, we're seeing that a lot of the police reform bills that have been presented are not being passed by the Senate. And so when you think about a trial having the power, the ability to transform policy, to transform culture, does it really translate into that change that we're hoping to see? And so while there's been a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance on change in terms of a policy level, I do think that bringing in federal charges, I do think that this federal indictment is going to have a lot more power than just, the state of Minnesota finding Derrick Chauvin guilty. And it might be very disheartening and hard for some people to really look through the evidence that they have uncovered about this officer and to come to terms with the fact that he was not, disciplined in a way that corrected his behavior. And if he had been using similar force that the chief of police says is not a part of their training, not a part of their policy. Think about that. If he had used that force years ago and it had popped up on their radar, why wasn't there any disciplinary action? Why wasn't he terminated? And why was he allowed to train other officers if he had this history of using force that was not condoned by the police departments? And so I don't think is going to turn out very well for the Minneapolis Police Department, knowing what I know, having followed these stories, having spoken to a lot of the families who have been most impacted by this issue, I don't think that it's going to turn out well. And what we've heard here from people in the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul who have been organizing on this issue for years is that it's not just Minneapolis they need to look at, but they also need to look at the city of St. Paul's police department, because according to the investigation that has been done by independent community organizations, St. Paul is actually more deadly than Minneapolis. And after, covering these protests and seeing how protesters are impacted, we know that there's been a little bit of hot potato being played across these different agencies when they call the conservation officers, they call state patrol, they call local law enforcement, and then National Guard. One is taking accountability for what agency is deploying tear gas, what agency is using rubber bullets, what agencies are using mace and pepper spray. And so there also needs to be some examination done, even in Brooklyn Center, where we saw protesters tear gassed night after night, even after the mayor, who I interviewed last week, said it was outlawed. And according to residents, no one, poison control, law enforcement, military, can tell them what type of chemicals are in that tear gas. And so when you have law enforcement agencies that are overstepping laws that are being enacted by city officials, you start to see the abuse of power play out. And that's just one example. And so there are going to be many examples that surface just like that of there was a 14-year-old who, the DOJ cited that had been treated similarly to George Floyd years before George Floyd. And what I heard was that there were between
All right, so I have pulled up a few clips
that the police chief testified were not.
I have pulled up a few clips. I want to save some of that. I'm also going to play her interview with the mayor of Brooklyn Center. One of the things that I want to go back on, and I want to go back on those interviews with the mayor when he did the public pressers, because he did outlaw the tear gas. Tear gas can leave everlasting effects. So I'm going to get into this because people had asked for this. We're going to go to this one first. Hold on. Let me go to my StreamYard and we're going to share this. Share screen. Yes, we want the audio. So we're going to play this one first. Can I enlarge this? Is that possible? Well, yes, I want to play the video, but I also want to enlarge it. Well, here we go. We're going to play the video.
Don't overpay for Best Buy. This tool can save you money. It's a browser extension that automatically...
We've been learning more about this officer who we've just reported was taken into custody. This is the officer who was seen on that cell phone video footage with his knee on the neck of George Floyd. Now I want to talk here with, this is Maya Santa Maria. She's a local business owner. She owns a nightclub that's behind us, among other businesses. And you knew this officer, you worked with him. What was his role there?
He was our off-duty police officer at El Nuevo Rodeo for the better part of 2 decades.
And what was your interaction, your experience with him? Obviously, he worked security, you were saying. What was he like?
Yeah, he was in the capacity of off-duty officer. He was, he was kind of a calm gentleman. I never would have expected anything like this from him at all. But I did notice that he got very... anxious when there was a urban night where there were a lot of African-American people, as did many other officers. He was certainly not the only one.
So you saw a different tone or different posture from him when you had African-American patrons versus other races, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, ours is a predominantly Latino nightclub. With the Latino staff, the police kind of behaved in one manner. And then when we had a predominantly African or African American clientele, the way in which the entire event was treated was completely different.
And give me some details just for our viewers. So what are you talking about when you say that he treated them differently? What did he do? How did he act?
Well, really, it's systemic because it started all the way from licensing and went through the third precinct, and then was an expression of also how the officers reacted when they were there. I would just kind of characterize it as skittish. So they would get very nervous very quickly and want to pull out the pepper spray with any little thing that might happen, and they certainly acted very kind of group mentality. They always had to call backup if a little tiny thing happened. So it was different than what we saw in our Latin nights.
So your club also employed the victim here, George Floyd. Tell me about him and his role.
George was called in to do extra security as a support on some of our urban nights, which were usually Tuesdays or Sundays. And he was just a really nice guy. Everybody liked him. That's why he got called in by some of my guys. Hey, come and help us out tonight. We need some help. And he was very well liked in the community, both the Latino community and the African American community.
And going back to Officer Chauvin, did it surprise you when you saw him in this video? I mean, did they know each other based on your experience? They both worked for you at the club.
I don't suspect that they recognized each other, even though they may have crossed paths working together with me and my team. I don't think they recognized each other. I just like to think that had Chauvin realized that was one of my boys, that he would have treated him with more humanity. But either way, he should have been treated with more humanity and given mercy when he was begging for his life. And so it's really something that I can't explain. I can't believe that Derrick Chauvin did this.
I want to go back to something you just said because I think it's important. And obviously, this is your view of the officer, and we're welcome to hearing from him and his attorney. We want to know his side. But one thing that you said is how he treated African Americans, saying that he would the posture was different. They were skittish. You said that they would call police as backup. What did you mean by that?
One little thing would happen. Maybe a little fight would break out or something, and all of a sudden I would go downstairs and 5 or 6 on duty patrols were there, and that is not what I was used to seeing with my regular Latin nights, and I always thought that it was a little bit unjustified, and just always having to resort to spraying mace everywhere and hitting women and people that had nothing to do with any of the altercations. And it was just unfortunate that it was a very different vibe when we were doing our urban nights on behalf of the police and licensing as well.
Well, thank you, Maya, so much for giving us your perspective. Appreciate it.
So my question is, I want to check into this. I took a few notes as I do. She was talking about the 3rd precinct and licensing. So I'm going to check into, is the 3rd? No, the 3rd precinct got burnt down, but I'm sure I can still find. I'm just wondering if that was something as an established owner, when you own a business, if police and licensing, and that you had to have for different events, police, or if it was something that was, how do I explain it? Like a separate hire, so he had more than the one job. So wouldn't he have to be licensed in that particular area? I guess I need to look into that. That's very interesting. All right, here's the second one that I was able to pull up. And we're going to do this time. Definitely want audio.
Charged with second-degree murder in his death. David Penny, a co-worker of Floyd and Derrick Chauvin at a Minneapolis nightclub,
told our Jeff Pegues the two had a history, he said, when they worked security.
What kind of history?
They bumped heads.
How?
It has a lot to do with Derrick being extremely aggressive within the club with some of the patrons, which was an issue.
Jeff Pegues joins us now from Minneapolis with more on this part of the story. Jeff, what else are we learning about this?
Well, good morning, Gail. David Penny and many others are aware of George Floyd and Derrick Chauvin working at the same time at this nightclub. Chauvin was on the outside working a detail, and then George Floyd worked on the inside. Now, Penny, as you noted, was a co-worker also working on that security detail, and he told me that the two men butted heads. He also described Chauvin as being, in his words, aggressive toward minority customers. Now, Penny also tells me that the manager of the club would hand out paychecks to the security staff on the inside, people like George Floyd. And it was then their job to then pay the outside staff, people like Derrick Chauvin. And in one occasion, according to David Penny and another person we talked to, Chauvin took issue with how much he was being paid and blamed George Floyd, who had handed him the check. All right, so they had a beef, in your view, at least one time over money.
Exactly, but it's not George's responsibility of what he receives as pay for moonlight. That's the manager's job from the club.
But Derrick took it out on George.
Exactly, is what I did understand at the time. Yes, because he took it out against me, and I actually made him leave the. I had to make him leave the club.
So, is there any doubt in your mind that Monday, Derrick didn't know who George was?
I'd say he knew him.
You think he knew who George was?
Yes.
Any doubt in your mind that he knew who George was?
No, no doubt in my mind. He knew exactly who George was.
So we also spoke with the club owner, who said that she was not aware of any payroll issues, but she also described Derrick Chauvin as being aggressive toward minority customers. And there is another issue. She said that, she didn't want to complain to the police department about Chauvin's behavior because she felt if she complained, she would get someone worse than Derrick Chauvin, because in her words, Chauvin was one of the good cops in the precinct. So she didn't want him being replaced with another cop that she felt would be a bully. Gail.
Hey, Jeff, if what Mr. Penny is saying is true, and he does seem very adamant about it, what does it mean? Is this significant?
It's significant because investigators will try to figure out what was in Derrick Chauvin's mind at the time this incident here occurred. Was there some sort of intent? I mean, if you look at that video, there are a lot of people who are wondering, why did he keep pressing his knee against George Floyd's neck? And so they have, according to our sources, asked the same questions. Did the two men know each other? They are aware that the two men worked at that club at the same time.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much.
So that is very telling and interesting. Like, oh, that's kind of disturbing. I want to go back and re-listen to that video again. And I'll tell you why I want to go back and listen to that video again when I'm offline. I caught some things in there on some things that I want to check into. She didn't want to So it's my understanding she didn't want to complain because then so I'm confused. So moonlighting, what does that mean? So the department actually sends officers to this club, but she didn't want to complain because she didn't want to end up with a different officer that could be more aggressive and more bullying. So I need to do some checking into, because I think we already know, but there's just some things like, I mean, we all heard the trial. And, I've streamed the trial for Mikado Media. I've streamed the trial for other places. But But this is a huge thing. We're talking a federal indictment. And I don't know if you guys caught my video from earlier today. We were at the Hardee's and they had a man in custody and were transporting him from the federal to, now they'll do that and they'll switch them, you know, a few stops here and there. So I kind of wondered, and by the time we got through drive-thru waiting for my chicken strips, the 5 minutes, they were gone. But like, I mean, if you watch the video when I zoomed in, you could see him being frisked. He does kind of, I don't know. I don't want to say, and I don't want to make assumptions, but, you know, we're talking 4 men being indicted. Do they put them in custody right away when they're indicting them? Is my question. Is that possible? I can tell you that 2 of the officers had just started at precinct 3. I can verify one of the officers had other experience working for a police force. The other one, I believe, was what they call wet behind the ears, new. But I'm not sure about that 100%. I really didn't dive into the other, I'm gonna be honest with you. I didn't dive into the little guy standing there, although he could have jumped in, but he did nothing. And the third guy, I mean, the second guy that was sitting on his back and his legs, and then the other guy was sitting completely on his legs. I was tossed and at a crossroads with that, because the one guy didn't really have involvement, period. He didn't stop it. He didn't help George. He didn't participate or partake in it per se, but he's still guilty because George Floyd lost his life because he did absolutely nothing to stop it. You know, this is a tough case. And now that there's federal indictment on all 4 of them, George Floyd is, or not George Floyd, but Derrick Chauvin has asked for a new trial. His lawyers have asked for a new trial. Okay. Miss me with it, please. I forgot to read my disclaimer at the beginning, and I didn't want to be on here too long. I've already been on here almost half an hour, so I'm going to read my disclaimer. So let me go and share this quick. And we don't need audio. Alrighty, here it is. This is our disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for a purpose such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Sorry I didn't read it at the beginning. I read it at the end. I'm going to start putting the copyright disclaimer in the description. If anybody has anything they want me to look into on this, I guess there's a few things that we missed in the beginning of this case. So let me take the copyright disclaimer off. We could take that off. So I have a lot of questions. So I'm going to go back. And these are the kind of questions. Any business owners in Minneapolis, can you email me or get a hold of me? I have questions on the, where did I write it? I wrote it on here somewhere. I just want to know a few things. Like, I want to know about the licensing. The licensing and what the business owner referred to as the licensing, and how she told the one reporter she doesn't want to complain about Chauvin, because she didn't want to get somebody that was more aggressive or bullying. So I definitely want to check into that. Now, keep in mind, I believe the witness testified for the state in Chauvin's case. So there was a conflict. They did know each other. Lots of questions and just certain things we need answered. I'm glad the federal government is involved. So let's hope we get some justice. This is, I mean, I didn't want it to have to go to a federal level. Our state should have been able to handle it and charge all 4 of those police officers with what they did. But clearly, we had to get the federal government involved. And there's just statutes and stuff that need to be, brought up that aren't getting signed and getting put in front of our state legislator and our state senate. So we need to work on bettering ourselves with that. But this is Dee Dee's Friday night flight night. I'm glad you stopped on by. I'm going to leave this video up. And we're going to look into some things, especially with it being a federal case now. I notice a lot of states are sending things to federal. A lot of states. I don't touch on the Lori and Chad Dingbell's cases. I actually watch a really good YouTuber who covers that case immensely, greatly. I'm more of a spectator and justice for JJ, Tylee, and Tammy. But I've never covered that case. I've followed it on Facebook groups, and I've followed Kathy over at Left Undone in covering this case because she does an amazing job on it. But they're also getting the federal involved. So very interesting that some states are choosing not to get their state involved, but the federal government. That speaks volumes to me. Volumes. No, it's not COVID. My allergies have been horrible. And yes, I'm in a sweater. I guess you could say I could be 89 degrees outside. I'm still going to be in a sweater because I'm always freezing. But I'm going to sign off. I will be back on tomorrow night because guess what? We finally got our snack crate from last month. Or no. Is this from last month? Yes, this is from April. Right? So we got our snack crate. So I'm going to do a Saturday snack crate review tomorrow night. And you guys want to guess? So if I have any Ukraine followers, please join us. Man, this was interesting. I'm going to tell y'all right now. I had this discussion on AV News Crew today. Shout out to Matt and Apple. I'm not a huge fan of cheese puffs. So I didn't try those, but everything else was really good. But yeah, I'm not a fan. I don't do cheese puffs, cheese balls. So we got our snack crate for April. We'll do that. I should be getting my snack crate from May. Well, wait, did we order snack crate for this next month, or did we order Yum Yum? I'm going to have to wait and see. So we're going to do a Saturday night snack crate tomorrow night, and it's from the Ukraine. Come join us tomorrow night. I'll see you guys all later. Have a blessed day, or a blessed night.